Let's see if maybe we can get underway before. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. So, welcome to the first panel of the day. As in my role as moderator, I prefer a lighter touch. So the way I think that we'll do this is I'll let each of the speakers introduce themselves. They'll run through each of their presentations, and then we'll open it up to Q&A sort of as quickly as you can, because I think the Q&A is really where a lot of the energy is. So thank you again all for being here. We are on the cusp of having an actual community power aggregation program in the state of New Hampshire that's in operation, which is a very exciting place to be after years of talking about it. And so you will hear from a lot of the big players here today. We'll hear about what this means for communities, especially in the high price environment that we're in. And I think we'll hopefully hear a bit about what this means in the sort of volatile price environment that we're in as well. What will it look like to launch in the midst of what's objectively a fairly crazy market? We're going to have a representative from the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire start first, followed by an individual with Calpine, followed by an individual with Ascend Analytics, followed by Calpine, and finally from Standard Power. So I'm just going to yield the floor here to our first presenter, Henry Herndon.
Thank you, Sam. So, Sam, you said it really well the other day, and I thought you might say it today. But you have a way of describing this challenge, this energy transition, as yes, it is a technical challenge, and it's obviously a very complex and challenging technical challenge. But perhaps more so than that, it is a political challenge. It is a challenge to acquire the political strength to lead the reshaping of institutions and markets so that we can realize this energy transition. And I think that is a key theme of what community power is about, and something that I want to unpack with you all today. And also, first and foremost, community power, what it's really about is engagement, public participation, civic engagement. And I guess I'll start by, in that line of thinking, asking for you all to help me out just a little bit. And I see there are a few folks in the room who are associated with the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, and maybe those folks could identify themselves by standing up. I think there's just a couple of them. There's others in, good number of us. And now stay standing, please. There's also folks who are on energy committees in their towns, or if you have now or have ever served on an energy committee, could you just stand up so we can identify you? Lots of folks. Anyone who has now, or has in the past, or now holds elected office locally or otherwise. I think there's a couple folks. So as you can see, it's a lot of us. That's fantastic. And what I want to demonstrate with this is the value of civic engagement that we hold in New Hampshire. You guys can sit down. We can applaud you and recognize your civic engagement. But me, I'm from Massachusetts. I moved up here 11 years ago, and really one of the things that drew me to New Hampshire was the abundance of civic engagement that I found here. And all of us, we are motivated to participate in our democracy. We're motivated to do good work to improve our homes, our towns, our state, and our larger natural environment. And that's a key part of this community power project. A lot of, I might just sort of reiterate some things. I think some themes that have been touched on. Anytime you're at a conference, you're always reiterating other aspects of talks. But many of us are motivated, I'd say a majority of us are motivated by a sense of urgency and obligation and responsibility to act to mitigate the risks and the damages being caused by a changing climate and a warming planet. And equally important, we're motivated to act in our economic security, to secure our economic system. And in this context, we've talked about it, skyrocketing utility rates, Eversource up to 22 cents from 10 cents, Unitil at 26 cents, unheard of, and Liberty up there as well. I think the New Hampshire Electric Cooperative is also experiencing rate shock, but to a lesser degree because of the portfolio management approach they take, which I think Scott, who's on this panel, is going to explain for us how that is something community power can use to lower costs. But in this context, high price context, it's clear now more than ever that our local energy economy is the solution to our economic energy challenges as well. So we know these are the solutions. That's why we're all here at this conference. And the question is sort of, why have we not been able to achieve this energy transition as of yet? The reason is that there's a gap. There's a leadership gap where our current or legacy institutions, while providing critical and necessary functions, are not equipped with the capacity of the leadership to lead this transition. And what is needed is a new institution that does have that leadership capacity, that can be locally accountable and that can empower cities and towns and these local leaders who are in this room and broadly spread across the state to lead this transition. And that is what Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire is becoming. That is what these 23 cities and towns that are working to create this coalition are working towards. And that is what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So I do have some slides. I'll get into the slides, and I'll be brief. I do want to get into the discussion, and we've got some great technical experts in Bob and Josh and Scott, and looking forward to unpacking some of the details of this as well. So I'll talk about coalition members, economy of scale. I'll talk about governance and accountability. I'll talk about the technical services and operations briefly to just preview some of these other speakers. And then we'll talk briefly about public advocacy. So this slide shows a map of the 23 cities, towns, and counties that have formed this new public power agency, Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. See, we've been joined by another member. And this organization was incorporated 14 days and 1 year ago. The 23 members represent approximately 20% of the state's population and approximately 119,000 electric customers. That is approximately 960,000 annual megawatt hours. And importantly, when these communities launch community power programs, they will become the default energy providers for their communities, and they will control the sourcing and the decisions associated with those electricity sales. Importantly, they will also control the revenues, which at full enrollment is more than $150 million in annual energy sales, locally controlled and accountable to these community power programs. The first wave of communities is looking at launching this coming spring, April, May 2023, with an additional wave of communities later that year, perhaps in 2024. And there are many, many communities across the state that are hoping to take advantage of this new market. Economy of scale. This slide illustrates the coalition's economy of scale relative to the electric distribution utilities in the state. So on the left, you can see that green bar at the bottom is that wave one that I talked about, approximately half of the coalition members that may launch this coming spring. And the combined dotted line and gray bars are the full utility load. So you can see that green bar is on the scale of the three smaller utility companies, Unitil, New Hampshire Electric Cooperative, and Liberty. The blue bar, that's the full current, the blue plus green, that's the full current coalition membership. And then that yellow bar is the 30 plus cities and towns that have expressed interest in joining the coalition or otherwise launching community power programs. So what this shows is that in a few short years, the coalition could quickly become the largest energy supplier in the state. Governance. The Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire is community governed, member governed, and it is governed by a board of 20 locally appointed directors and another 20 or so locally appointed alternates. These are select board members, city councilors, former public utility executives, former utility commissioners, business entrepreneurs, lawyers, engineers, many different, a broad depth of experience and expertise in the board and the executive team at the coalition. and all of them accountable to their local governments that have appointed them to that role. The coalition, in addition to its board, has 6 standing committees that has met no fewer than 80 times, held no fewer than 80 public meetings over the past year and 2 weeks. So I won't dare try to calculate the number of hours and hard work that has gone in from all these different community leaders. And hang in there, we're getting close. The coalition is also supported by a legal team and a startup consulting team, 2 law firms, and 2 consultants, Samuel Golding, president of Community Choice Partners, and myself. And I'll talk briefly about operations and some of the technical details. So this summer, the coalition issued a competitive request for proposals for comprehensive services and credit support. As a result of that RFP and the recommendations of the committees, the board took the action of commencing negotiations for services across 4 categories with various providers. So at present, the Community Power Coalition is negotiating for services with 1, for energy portfolio risk management services, Ascend Analytics, and Scott is going to explain what energy portfolio management is and how it can lower energy costs and help develop new local renewable energy projects. I'll leave that to some of the perspective that has occurred in other markets. 2, Calpine Energy Solutions for provision of retail customer services. Josh is going to talk about how data can be the currency of the future and can animate the distributed energy resource revolution that we're all very excited about. And then Clean Energy New Hampshire to provide support in engaging and educating cities and towns across the state to develop their own community power programs. So I'll just reiterate, there are no contractual relationships between the coalition and any of these firms. It's possible that would change at some point in the future. So the final thing, I want to kind of come back to this civic engagement and public advocacy and recognize board chair Clifton Below, who has been a key leader in the organization in our policy efforts and in dating back quite some time, but also sort of recognizing that we wouldn't be here without Clifton Below, but I don't think Clifton would be here without us and this concept of stronger together, that our communities, if we're able to work collaboratively at the legislature, at the Public Utility Commission, we are better empowered to realize the policy and market reforms that are required for this energy transition. This represents just a selection, not all, but I guess 31 of the 39 board directors and alternates that are serving on the coalition's board on behalf of their communities. And it's been a real privilege to work with these folks, and it's really exciting to see what they're creating for the state. So with that, I'm gonna hand it off to Scott, who is going to explain energy portfolio risk management for us.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate your. Oh, okay.
There you go.
All right.
Okay.
Good. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to share and present with you this morning and take part in this panel. Apologize that I can't be there in person. My name is Scott Wrigglesworth. I'm the Managing Director of Operations and Strategy at Ascend Analytics. I've been with Ascend for over 5 years, but was a client of Ascend's for over a decade. Seamlessly joined the team here after working with the Dayton Power and Light Company in Ohio, where we also went through community aggregation changes. I also worked with the retail arm of that company there, eventually AES Corporation, and I reside and work from Ohio. Next week, we have our summit out in Boulder, Colorado. There's a lot of activity getting ready for that. Many of our clients coming out to visit us. A little bit about Ascend and those clients. We serve a variety of companies all across the spectrum, pretty vast, from investor-owned utilities to public power, CCAs and retailers, merchant developers, producers, banks, and even insurance company. We have 7 integrated software products around which we offer many of our analytic services, subject matter experts, and we extend, obviously, these products to our customers as well. Ascend approaches its customers, and then it will approach our engagement in New Hampshire in a fashion that is collaborative. We have decades of experience in retail operations. We're growing very, very quickly. We have over 100 employees now. They're motivated, they're dedicated, they're extremely smart. I think about 20 or 30% of our staff are PhDs, and they dig into the details of markets, details of modeling, and so forth. PowerSim is our portfolio modeling platform, which I'm going to share a little bit about with you here. We have a close working relationship with our clients. We pursue transparent and collaborative engagement, solution-oriented, and these relationships apply to many of our CCAs that we work with today under JPAs in California. We model the ISO New England market, and we provide a depth of understanding there for many clients. We view our engagement with CPCNH and the advent of community power in New Hampshire, and certainly our relationships we may build with all of you, as a partnership, not merely a vendor or contractor or consultant stepping in to give some sort of opinion, but to engage and roll up our sleeves alongside you. Just a little bit, these are 3 CCAs that we work with in California. I'll share a little bit about each of them just so you can have some understanding there. Sonoma Clean Power in the middle is where I'll start. Sonoma is a software licensee, and they are a heavy user of our models. They take out a lot of time to use them themselves, and they have a pretty bright staff. They are highly dependent upon our Ascend market intelligence for the CAISO market and our long-term fundamentals. Silicon Valley Clean Energy and 3CE, our engagements there are quite similar, but we provide them with the full panoply of reports and risk policy engagement, risk committee participation, pricing of customers for them for special deals that they might have. So kind of covering the full array of retail activities, counterparty credit risk, and some very technical things as well. So we are excited to have built those relationships going on over 5 years now with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. As we engage you and join you in the changes in New Hampshire, we are excited about seeing impacts, right? Henry talked a little bit about this, but there's some things that are what I'll call immediate impacts, intermediate, and then long-term. So just to give you a perspective on kind of a rollout of how we see things transpiring with our engagement. The immediate impacts are going to be around customer savings, community control, what I'll call active management of the power portfolio, as opposed to kind of a passive set it and forget it hedge approach. Understanding the market relationship and the formation of the market, and then kind of ramping up, getting our feet under us as a team and building the important infrastructure and policies and relationships. In the intermediate, which doesn't start too long after the near future, we're going to see that we're going to be trying to build reserves. So CPCNH will build its bank account, and much like the CCAs in California, they'll be able to go to credit rating agencies and establish that, which will be a big factor in kind of the ongoing efficiencies and cost savings. There'll be the opportunities to self-insure effectively by having those reserves and those reserve policies. And then in the intermediate, we'll start to also look at resource planning and procurement. Many states have what are called integrated resource plan requirements, and we engage in those activities heavily across the United States. New Hampshire does not have a regulatory requirement to do these sorts of things, but our practices in that are best practices for a power portfolio. And so we'll extend the capability to CPCNH as it integrates local projects, evaluates them, determines the impacts, and if necessary, chooses between them. The long-term impacts will resolve around kind of proving the new paradigm and establishing best practices and extending the capabilities to growth in this sector in New Hampshire. We see the potential to reap a significant clean energy harvest. There's not a lot of clean energy in New Hampshire and New England, and so as this builds, seeing it come to fruition will be kind of a fulfilling moment in the future. And then down the road, there'll be more savings, more potential to invest in local community and clean power. There are some foundational elements related to this activity. So up front, in the blocking and tackling and planning, we have lots of things related to establishing risk management committees, policies, making sure our analytics are in place and the capabilities are rigorous. They're not casual, not in spreadsheets, but in hardened production level software that's been proven. Provide decision-making support, which I'll describe here in a bit. And then as we engage in the active portfolio management I mentioned, we'll be looking at kind of backing into this here, a monthly RMC meeting that will establish a lot of transparency and visibility for decision makers, weekly reports and forecasts that will be fed to them throughout the month to keep them abreast of things that might be changing, and then daily monitoring and alerts so that we can raise the red flag if the market's moving or if conditions are changing, and be active and deliberate in our strategies. That all leads to nimble decision making when we need it. And so if something comes up, we're able to adapt and be fairly agile in responding with the portfolio. The long run benefits of that are going to be strategic hedging, long-term procurement, as I mentioned, local project contract valuation and decision-making support, which I'll discuss a little later. Deep understanding of how the Community Power Agency comes to give its rates and describe the projects that it wants to engage in, whether it be production or maybe things like EV charging stations or energy efficiency and so forth. And then the framework on the wholesale side, the key part of this, right, is that it enables stronger positioning on the retail side. We're not beholden to the old and casual way of doing retail, but we're able to step in and say, okay, how can we enable that retail to be more robust and have a stronger position because we have our ducks in a row on the wholesale side. In terms of how we engage our clients and work with them, especially in the portfolio management space, there's often a cycle, and this kind of falls back to the monthly, weekly, daily sort of a paradigm I described earlier. But that is something where we have the ability to work and collaborate with decision makers, execute and understand the implementation of trades, understand changes in our portfolio, be it customers or resources. And then we have automated systems that will go out to the market and get all the requisite data to make sure we're modeling correctly with the right data. It's not stale. PowerSim will execute in an automated fashion, and then we can deliver reports and have those conversations and make those decisions again. PowerSim and Ascend, or Ascend uses PowerSim in a way that is a bit unique in the industry. This is from the Boulder crowd, so mountain climbing, rock climbing is a big deal out there. They love it. There is safety out there. They do have a rope through their carabiner, but the graphic artist didn't like it on the slide, so they removed it. But basically, we view that we are bridging the gap between the physical and the financial. So many models and many systems that are very engineering focused dwell on the physical and ignore markets and the things that are happening in markets. Bank models and spreadsheets in big monthly or annual time chunks focus on the financial markets and ignore many of the physical constraints and unique elements of the power portfolio. And our PowerSim is a hybrid model that we're able to bring those two things together and come up with very effective ways to manage portfolios. A lot comes down to risk appetite. And so having industry best practice implemented and have formal policies and clarity defined will lead to, on the right-hand side here, the ability to find ourselves correctly on what's called the efficient frontier. So if you are into stocks or portfolio management for retirement accounts, the idea is that you want to choose the stocks that have the best risk return trade-off. That same element applies in the portfolio management space. And so optimization of the portfolio is where we want to be. We're not going to be promoting the idea that a government JPA is going to be speculating and just trying to game the market, nor do we necessarily want to be so passive that there's a fear of risk and positioning. We want to balance that for optimization. And so understanding that risk appetite and positioning the portfolio correctly is important. We do that in PowerSim using market fundamentals and market data, modeling of the client, or in this case, CPCNH portfolio, simulating meaningful uncertainty across many elements, but not random uncertainty, meaningful, because we look at the correlative or the structural relationships between things from all the way from weather to hourly and sub-hourly prices. And it gives us output that we can generate to give not just point estimates on results, but ranges of uncertainty that can guide decision making. PowerSim this is just a quick snapshot of PowerSim. Not only will we be using it on CPCNH's behalf, but CPCNH staff will eventually have access to everything and have the ability to utilize it. It's capable of modeling the full power portfolio here in New England and across the country, but we can model all types of resources and generation, customer load, rates, and so we can put the whole portfolio together in a way that represents it accurately. Again, a little bit about the fact that we can take those automated processes, provide a lot of detailed reporting in many different medium, and this is an example of a risk management sort of look. Key on this is price risk, and I won't get into explaining the whole thing, but you can see here that we're not merely giving a number like we do down in the corner, but we're giving the visualization, the ability to understand what's happening and what decisions we might take out of it. Aside from risk reporting is our market reports. And so our market intelligence team at Ascend covers all the ISOs in the United States, New England ISO included. And we have many clients, a few just dropped in here, but many clients relying upon that ISO New England market report for decision making in the power space. And so this will be a key factor in our support of clean energy, local clean energy in New Hampshire. Those market fundamental reports key off of a lot of core elements. I'm not going to go through all these, but just to give you some perspective, we're looking at the structural elements, the policy elements, and very practical things as we build up to a market equilibrium perspective on the sort of things that will happen in markets as they evolve over time. A classic example of this is taking all of these things in California, for example, and saying, how ducky will the duck curve get? And so that's the sort of thing that we would do in New Hampshire. How will price shapes change? How will load shapes change with the advent of more renewables and policy and so forth? We do use the fundamentals quite often because we want to look out into the future to evaluate PPAs and RFOs and in this case, local projects. And so we have a process, an automated process that can assist in the RFO request for offer on projects, and we effectively funnel them down and make the best decision for the portfolio and what is needed for the communities. Here you can see it's not always just about price. So we're not evaluating resources simply to say, okay, this one is the best price, let's do it. We're looking at the uncertainty around its production, any profile risk that it has, how will it behave hour to hour with respect to intermittency, and then locational differences in price. What are the price impacts, and does it match my portfolio well, or do I take on basis risk in entering into an agreement like that? We've run these processes for many utilities and CCAs, evaluating over 500 resources in the industry and able to pare that down for our customers. With CPA in Clean Power Alliance in California, we've helped contract over nearly 1 gigawatt of storage, for example. The insights gained from these things are significant. We're able to understand as we do these how the market's changing with respect to clean energy. And as we do these processes in New Hampshire, we'll get these same takeaways. In wrapping up here, Ascend is active in the clean energy transition. Our reputation is out there if you want to look us up across the United States. We have been fully engaged in the JPA model in California, and we've seen its benefits firsthand. We're excited about seeing that happen in New Hampshire. We think you're on the cusp of meaningful change that's going to set the bar for other states as well. So with that, I'll hand it off to the next presenter, but I look forward to taking part in the panel.
Next up, we have Josh Brock, who is with Calpine Energy Systems. And I'm not a Mac guy.
Get you to your presentation. There you go. Cool.
Y'all don't need to see my speaker notes, so we'll go ahead and take that off. One step closer. So so Josh Brock, Vice President of CCA Commercial Operations for Calpine Energy Solutions. I'm going to give you 30 seconds of sales pitch, and I promise the rest of this will not be any of that. But we are a back office provider for community power agencies across the United States. We represent somewhere upwards of 250 communities, probably about 4.5 million service accounts, which you could call that around somewhere between 12 to 15 million in population. We manage the utility data. We use that data to help answer important questions and drive the core business operations of community power agencies across the United States. So that's my sales pitch. I hope you've enjoyed it. The next 14 minutes will be something somewhat relevant, but hopefully more entertaining. And I say this because I come from a public agency. That's where I started my career. I worked as the sustainability officer for the city of San Diego. And I showed up one year to a conference. It was all about smart cities. I'm not sure if anyone here has remembered when that was like a word that was going around, right? And I went to a panel and they're like, smart cities, technologies that'll help you drive policy. And I was like, cool, that's what I'm interested in. Tell me more. And I sat down and I got 3 presentations about streetlights. And not just like, this is why they're relevant to policy, but like, they've got a sensor and then there's a camera in it and then like we can send you data and we can do all these things. And I was like, you've answered 0 of my really important questions. I know a ton about streetlights and I hate that you've taken an hour of my life. So I promise not to do that to any of you. This is going to be more about where data can take you, and this is a bit the story of the data, and what happens when you take the step of moving from a passive participant in the energy industry into a world where you now have control over what happens in your community and how that data drives and can drive action. Okay, so a bit of context setting here. This is a map of California. I wanted to show this just to give you an idea of sort of the scale of how things have happened. And this is just me validating for you that the data I'm presenting comes from a source big enough that it's not anecdotal evidence, but it is of a really large statistically significant data set. So in California, we've, over the last 12 years, we've moved from what you see on the left here, which is, sort of this monopoly-based structure that most or many states have, into a place where we now have customer choice, and it's built around these public or not-for-profit institutions becoming the default provider for their communities. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. I promise no more graphs of California. We're not in California. It's not that relevant. But here's sort of the growth, here's the growth of what has happened in California from when we got started in 2010 to where we're at as of 2021. I didn't have a chance to get updated. I did get a chance to update the graph, but I did give you some updated numbers, which is right now about 1/3 of Californians currently take service from a community power agency, representing about 5.5 million customer meters. You can see we have this real exponential growth that has taken place in there. And New Hampshire is really on the cusp of that. And I would argue that the laws that allow you to do this are actually more progressive and probably the best model in the United States as it stands right now. So the first story of data is now that California was in this position to be able to control its sort of energy future, what did they do, right? Over the last 12 years, here's some of the numbers around what being a load-serving entity or what being a community power agency has meant for those of us in those communities. Over 6,000 megawatts of new solar, over 1,000 megawatts, it's over a gigawatt of new wind. Significant amount of storage. The number you see there, 2,600 megawatts, is actually increased significantly over the last year. So these are 2021 numbers. The geothermal numbers increased, as well as new biogas and other projects in there. This is all spurred, and these all spurred by community power agencies. They are the off-takers of that energy, and they are the ones who made the decision of where and how those projects were going to get built, and that's important. And this is why. They represent their community. They know best what their community needs. They are a reflection of, and people who represent them on those boards are community members. So the choices they make are a reflection of what they feel is most important to that community. Where they choose to build projects, the type of projects they choose to build, where they're going to be sited is all a reflection of that, right? And so here's an example of how community power agencies have selected to build new projects in there. And I've highlighted both the locations. This is from a trade organization out there called CalCCA, the California Community Choice Aggregation Authority. And you can see projects are all over the place, but significantly speaking, they're in areas of both high opportunity. So we have a high desert area. There's barely any rain. We don't have any rain to begin with, but there's even less there. So it's great for solar. But we also have significant opportunities for offshore wind. We have great wind resources. But the choice to build those, 100 years into having these monopolies, the monopolies did not choose to build resources in those areas. They chose to build them that was the most advantageous for them, not for their community. That's an important distinction that over the last 10 years, the community power agencies have made a point to make. We're choosing where we build it, we're choosing what we build, and that's important. It's also not just about what they chose to build, it's also about what they chose not to build, right? So, I give you all of that to say, data is now the currency of the grid. So data initially, and this is not a surprise to anyone in the energy industry, data is what drives our choices, it's what drives our procurement, it's what drove where they built those projects, how big those projects were going to be, how long they were going to procure those projects. And that's normal for the energy industry, right? And so I say that just to set the baseline. That's where we were at, that is where we are at, but where we're going is a little bit different. And data will continue to be the most valuable currency of the grid and what will drive how we interact with it. I promise there are very minimal graphs like this, but just to give you an idea, this is from, I think, yesterday. It's just a shot of ISO New England. It just shows, what the load was like. It shows all sorts of things relevant to, if you're in the procurement space, this means a lot to you, right? This is what drives where you're at. And this is how, from the utility perspective, this is what they're looking at, both energy they procured, but also they've got spot markets that they have to manage. This is sort of business as usual, right? This is where we're going. So what you're looking at is two sort of relevant pieces of information. As we get more data, you're now in control of what happens in your community, but also that data speaks to what you're able to now manage and operate. So in a world where not only are we investing in steel in the ground, traditional resources or renewable resources, but we're also enabling and taking action on demand response or the world of virtual power plants. But in order to do that, we have to establish a model that's going to value those appropriately. And you need data to do that, because what becomes important is this is not now sited in one location where I can value that energy at that spot and where that energy goes, but in a world where you've got virtual power plants and demand response resources everywhere, where those resources are located, how they can control the load and how much they control matters. And I need to be able to value that across the spectrum of values that it creates. So what you're looking at here is, and I'm going to take a step away, I promise to not walk around too much to the person operating. What you see here is this is what we call the avoided cost curve, and this is on a per month basis. I can probably do this with a pointer, can't I? There we go. Yeah, all right. I'll walk around less now. So what you see here is this is the avoided cost curve, and this is where we took every hour of every day, put it into its month, and decided, based on real values, how much avoided energy usage is worth. right? And so you can see in the California context where we have extremely granular data, you can see both that we've got all these different value streams, and you don't have to read those, it's just important to know there's a lot of different values there. It's not just the electron commodity, right? But the value, we're able to value greenhouse gas emissions, we're able to value methane emission reduction or leakage that isn't going to incur, line losses, congestion, all these different things that take place on the grid. We're able to value that and then give that value to a resource that says, if you avoid 1 kilowatt hour, here's how much that is worth based on all these things. And we can do it on both a time and locational basis, right? And that's important. And what you see up here is I just took one of the tools that we use, which allows us to take that data and then model out different programs for the community. I took this and just modeled out a very simple HVAC program. Sort of asked the question: if I installed a bunch of high efficient HVACs in the community, what would that be worth? And this helps break apart the traditional model where that HVAC has a value to you as a consumer, which is it's a comfort value, it's heating, it's air conditioning. But it has a grid value, and that's a new value stream that you can now tap into and that I can now incentivize as the load serving entity, as the community power agency. So not only can I allow my community to incentivize them to improve the quality of the world that they live in, right? Better air quality, more efficient in reducing their energy bills, but I can also produce a value stream that allows that full community to establish and build out a number of resources, and I can value those resources based on what they contribute to the grid. So in this case, I've just bottled an HVAC, and that tells me that, while many parts of the month it's not going to do a lot, that's not a surprise. But when it's really important, it produces a lot of value, and that value produces a lot of monetary value to me by avoiding expensive energy. The other important thing to note here is it's not just a top-down driven effort that's taking place. All across the United States, companies are developing business models that are going to affect how we use energy, and they're doing it completely agnostic to regulators, state policy, or really any other intervention. They're doing it because consumers are demanding more. What they don't realize, consumers, is that what they're demanding is not just the Alexa unit, which allows my kids to demand music whenever they want to, which that's a whole other conversation, but it allows them to now control it. Hey, Alexa, set my thermostat to 72, right? Cool, Alexa can do that. But also that thermostat is actually a load controllable unit, right? And so if there was a value stream that I could then tap into, where instead of setting it to 72, it sets it to 73, that incremental marginal change to me on a comfort level is probably de minimis, but across 200,000 homes, that's a massive amount of impact, right? And those business models are already out there. And it's not just the Alexa and the thermostat. This is a company called Ohm Connect. They are nationwide, and they basically help consumers get access to low controllable devices, mainly thermostats and smart plugs. And over the holiday in September, I think Memorial Day, Labor Day. Yeah, all right. We all know what I'm talking about. Thank you. It's one of the two for sure. We had our market blew out, the grid was sort of in crisis. They signaled their devices, and this is the impact they had over the course of a handful of days. 6 million communications to customers, 1.3 million devices were signaled, and over 2.7 million in incentives paid to the consumers, right? New value stream the consumers are getting, cash in their hands. And on the other side of that, most of these are community power agencies that are off-taking that energy, which is to say they're getting that energy reduction so that they're not exposed to really crazy market prices, right? So it helps them control their load, but it also allows the community to be an active participant in what's happening in their community from an energy basis. Also importantly, did they put their numbers in here? 1.5 gigawatt hours. So that's the amount of energy saved. But what's really important and is not expressly articulated here is you could say that's completely carbon-free energy. That would otherwise be supplied by a thermal unit, most likely, right? Natural gas or something else. So 1.5 gigawatt hours of clean energy spread throughout the community on a distributed basis because of business models like this. And that business model was building way before there was a value stream for them to tap into because consumers were already into it. And I know in New Hampshire this is impossible, but let me just ask the question, who here has a smart thermostat or some other controllable device? A Nest, an Ecobee, anything like that? Yeah, right? And that's just standard marketing, right? All those devices are load controllable. So if and when that becomes available, those devices can get signals. There can be additional value streams that come down through that. Okay, so last 3 slides. I think I'm okay on time. I'm not sure if that was a nod of yes or a nod of no, but we'll take it. So here's some of the impacts that this local control matters. One is air quality and particulate matter. So one of our partners in the California basin has a particular challenging air quality issue in their community. And what they're doing is they're taking the investment from the net revenue that they're getting from their community power agency, and they're putting it into programs that specifically help attenuate the amount of times peaker plants have to turn on, because when a peaker plant fires up and turns off, that's when it produces the most PM 2.5 or particulate matter. So the more that it can attenuate the usage of that peaker plant, the better the air quality is going to be, especially for that community within that first mile where they have a much higher asthmatic rate, they have all the traditional impacts of energy infrastructure, and as you might expect, a lot of those plants are located in communities that are traditionally underserved and undervalued for a variety of reasons. Second is community resilience. All across our partners, we see them investing specifically in community resilience and often focused on adverse events. So we see them investing in microgrids in areas where the grid goes down a lot so that they can have critical resources and critical infrastructure in play. We also see them investing in distributed battery solutions across fire, police, and community service centers, so that if and when the grid goes down, critical services will still have backup power that will be available for that. But also, there'll be community shelters that will have power so it can provide services to the community, whether it's shelters from heat or cold weather, whether it's, if in our community fire events are a whole other issue where people get evacuated and they need a place to go. They're investing in infrastructure that's going to support their community in ways that are important to what happens in their community, but also those are resources when they're not being used, they can, again, be part of the grid. They're discharging energy when it's needed, they're charging when it's not needed. And finally, and I've already talked about this, but local jobs and control. And I'll tell you a story from one of our partners in a very rural part of California where they have a very large lumber industry. And there's a lumber, they have a lot of lumber plants, and they have one biomass plant. And it takes all the waste from those lumber mills and it burns it for energy. They had a contract with the local utility. That contract was expiring, and if that contract was not renewed, their local lumber industry would likely shut down, and there'd be a loss of hundreds of jobs in their community. The community power agency stepped in and said, we know this power is a little bit more expensive than what we could buy otherwise, but we're going to contract the full value of that because we understand not only is that, one, it's a renewable resource, so we're able to claim that, and that's good, but two, this preserves hundreds of jobs in our community. And no one else was able to step in to do that. And if the community wasn't in that position, those jobs would have been lost. And that's important to note, and that is one of the most powerful things that a community power agency is able to do. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, everyone.
And now, having seen it done, I believe I can get us to the next slideshow. Last but not least is Bob Hayden, who's the president of Standard Power, and also can talk more about their partnership with Good Energy. Do you know how to hit we do this? Good?
All right, I think. Which button do I press here to advance the slide? Yeah, okay. Hi, folks. I'm Bob Hayden from Standard Power. I can't talk that fast, nor will I be that complex. I'll keep it simple. We are a team that's putting together community power programs here in New Hampshire. When the laws that enabled this program were first passed, there were several communities that were ready to go immediately. But clearly the laws weren't, and we've been through several years of playing with laws, trying to make them enable this dynamic and wonderful program for our communities. And there have been many people who've participated in the legislative process all along the way to get to the point we're at now, where we're very close to being able to launch these programs. Several now are already approved by our PUC, including the city of Keene, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. But what we first found out when we looked at the community power program and launching it here in New Hampshire immediately was not only the laws weren't quite ready for it, but the communities weren't ready for it, and it took a huge amount of planning and work to implement it. So Standard Power, my company, looked for a partner to work with who had some experience. Good Energy approached us to work with us, and we made a partnership to implement these programs here in New Hampshire. So we satisfied the first RFP process with the city of Keene, who has a goal to be 100% renewable for their energy needs in 2030. But the experience Good Energy brought to the table was important because it's critical that all of these plans that launch, particularly the early adopters, have success. This could be one of the most dynamic opportunities in the New England ISO. So when we look at the New England ISO, that's our power system. It's probably way smaller than even some of the individual aggregations in California. So California is a huge state or country, I'm not sure which. But from our perspective here in New Hampshire, that debate is surely open. But Good Energy's worked with other states who have implemented community power, starting as far back as 2012 in Illinois, 2014 in Massachusetts, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and New York since 2019, but Rhode Island and New Hampshire, who've kind of jockeyed for position as the next state to implement. Rhode Island's a little bit ahead of us, and they have launch plans already. In Illinois and New York, these plans have been working well, saving communities significant amounts of money and also providing more renewable power in their programs. Massachusetts, well, here we start talking about rates. Everybody's already received at least one Eversource bill with the new rates. Is that true? Most everybody's gotten one? All right. So the rates are crazy. The market's dynamic. The risk of energy costs is higher than it's ever been. And the numbers are higher than they've ever been. But there's a whole wide range of unique characteristics to the New England market that make us the most volatile area in the country. Easy of which is dependence on natural gas, which is constricted in how much we can get into the area. But in general, across all of the Good Energy programs in Massachusetts, and there's 46 of them that are using additional renewable energy in their programs, they are still below 12 cents for supply. And that's what we're all talking about here today, is the supply portion of our bills. Some interesting statistics on what's happened specifically here in New Hampshire is that our rates since in the last, I guess it's 18 months, have gone from 6.6 cents per kilowatt hour for supply to 22.5. That's illustrative of rate volatility. So that means that the rate for supply, the part we're talking about today, is up over 300%. In that same time, if you factor in the delivery costs, which have remained pretty stable, the overall rate has gone up 95% during that same time period. So maintaining the ability to protect customers against that risk is very critical, and I'll get to some of the numbers associated with that in a minute. Let's go back to Massachusetts. It's a little closer than California. Communities there have been surveyed about what they want to do with their community power plans on a regular basis, and they want to enjoy lower costs and more renewable energy. So towns like Dedham, Bedford, and Brookline have all increased their participation in renewable energy credit programs. And you can see some of those numbers. Oh, this one here isn't quite right. Anyway, the rates in Massachusetts are going up very quickly also, as they are here, because remember, we're all in the same territory. We're in the New England ISO. So these rates are affecting all of us in that area. But while Good Energy has kept prices down well below the offered rate of the utilities, they've also increased the amount of renewable power over that time. So you can see in communities like Arlington and Brookline, they've increased the percentage of voluntary renewable power by virtue of Class 1 RECs. That's our intent here in New Hampshire also. We expect to start our first 4 plans in the April or May range, And we're already looking at, for each of those communities, on-the-ground projects that are in varying levels of readiness. So when we survey people and talk to communities, we find out that they want to see projects in their neighborhood. And so we're trying to deliver that with opportunities in all of the communities where we're working at this time. In Massachusetts and Rhode Island, the surveys didn't indicate that they wanted to be able to point to it or see it. So they're a little more okay with having the project be a little more remote or having it specifically be just the Class 1 RECs. Again, Rhode Island was on the same timeline as New Hampshire, but they launched a little quicker, and Good Energy built an aggregation around the city of Providence for their early adopters, which represents about 15% of the utility load in Rhode Island. And Rhode Island is unique. The state already has a state law to be at 100% renewable by 2030 also. So they're going to leap pretty quick to that goal, and Good Energy will probably outrun it a little bit and get there a little sooner, but they're going to be a leader in renewable projects, probably largely with offshore wind. Let's see, what's the yellow spot? So Keene is our first one out of the box. Swansea, Marlborough, and Wilton are close behind. As I mentioned, we're looking at solar projects in Swansea and Wilton, and also because of the location, Keene and Marlborough probably will benefit from them. Keene is already associated with a hydroelectric program that's contributing at this time to their reserve fund. So their reserve fund for evaluating their projects or working on projects is well over 20 grand already. The same will hold true soon in Marlborough and Wilton. Swansea's already approved a location for solar for their community power plan, where we're looking at purchasing not only the electrons, because the electrons don't really make it green, even if it's from a solar project. We're looking at the all-in purchase of the electrons and the RECs in their community, so they'll be able to drive by and say, there's our project. That's why we're succeeding in our goals to be greener as a community. Okay. That's the end of the slideshow. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about surveys. Good Energy has surveyed over 10,000 people in their territory, including New Hampshire. 1,000 of those folks are from New Hampshire. So we have 1,000 data points, and I won't talk too much about data. It can be overwhelming. But in 1,000 data points, the curve, the bell curve of what people want is very similar. About 15% say, I want the cheapest electricity I can buy, and 15% say, I want 100% renewable right now. And somewhere in the middle, there are folks who say, well, I'd like to save a little bit, but I want to be greener. Or I don't mind paying a little bit more, and I want to be much greener. Those are the options we're offering to people in their community power plans. And we will aggregate those communities into a group so they enjoy buying power. In addition, because we're all across the New England ISO in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, it's likely that we'll be buying that power for larger aggregations that give us buying power across the 3 states, and maybe Connecticut will be, coming up soon also. And Maine has become more progressive. So when we look at that and give those options, that is what the people have asked for in the communities we're looking at. We know that in Keene, they have the goals, the 100% goals. And in conjunction with that, we're looking very carefully at a microgrid or resilient zone in the community for them, because it's what the community wants at the policy level in their town. So what that looks like for them is that we would have some generation capability in the community near services that keep the town running in a grid emergency. So there is a possibility that someday the grid goes down. I think we saw it a few years ago in an ice storm. So a resilient zone allows you to have services like police and fire, along with a little bit of residential units, refrigeration, gasoline availability. And so our early plan with them is to have that resilient zone in a federal economic development zone. So there's a few benefits that go along with that. And that's where we are. So as far as the relationship with Good Energy and Standard Power goes, Standard Power has been providing electricity here in New Hampshire to schools and towns for the last 10 years. During that time, we've included renewable energy for all of them, or the benefits thereof through group net metering. So they've saved millions of dollars at this point through group net metering programs across 60 towns and about 18 school districts. So that same logic of finding lower cost energy while increasing the renewable benefits is what we'll bring to community power. And we're pretty specific to New Hampshire. Standard Power is. Good Energy is a little broader because they've worked across the country. But we're much more focused on our towns, our communities, and the results that those folks in each community want. So that's it. Have a great day. Good to see you all. I'm glad everybody's so interested. This is a great subject. It changes the paradigm of energy, not only in New Hampshire, but eventually all of New England.
So this panel is a little crowded, means we have only about 15 minutes for Q&A, so I'm going to keep my questions completely to myself and just open it up to the audience. The room's small enough, so just project your voice. I'm going to stand here for Scott's well-being, so I'll repeat the questions for you, Scott, if there's one that I think is relevant to your experiences. And I'll have to, do I need to unmute Scott here, Josh? Or Josh, Scott, you might be muted, so you can unmute yourself. So,
thank you.
So questions from the crowd, thoughts about what you've heard today. Mr. Bemis.
Yes, I'm a chair of the energy committee in my little town. Would love to be part of community power. What are the steps necessary for a small town to become involved and get approval so that we can be part of it?
I think this is a question probably for Henry and for Bob. So if a town wants to become part of a community power aggregation, what are the steps? What's required if you're taking the community power coalition route, and what's required if you're going with a broker? So Bob, do you want to tee that off? Oh, and let's turn on your mic there.
There's an option.
Well, I can talk really loud too. Ooh, that's way too loud. I'll try to, can you hear me? You can. So with Standard Power and Good Energy, we have a simple form called a Memorandum of Understanding where we help you with all of the processes associated with community power and would include you in an aggregation if that's what you choose. Would help you design your community power plan based on a template of plans that have already been approved. On your side, it's up to you how deep you want to get into the process. We've worked with one town who said, we want community power, but we don't want to do anything. And so we've helped them a lot.
I'm confused here. What's the community power program that Cliff's been working on, and I've been working on, and Henry's been working on? And what's that got to do with Standard Power?
So maybe Henry could field that question, but
So there's multiple options. Bob Hayden and Standard Power and Good Energy provide community power services. The Community Power Coalition was incorporated last year by these communities to create a public nonprofit to provide similar services, or I guess quite different services actually. But in answering the question for how would you participate in the coalition model, 23 cities and towns have adopted the Joint Powers Agreement. That's the bylaws of this new public power agency. They get a seat on the governance board and they can participate in the oversight of that organization. So that's a select board decision for the town of Bristol. And then with whichever route you go, you would have to bring a community power plan or an electric aggregation plan to your town meeting for approval. And that then authorizes your select board to contract with Standard Power or the Community Power Coalition or whoever you would choose to provide your community power service.
So they are suppliers to community power coalition.
Not necessarily.
No.
That option still exists. We are an energy broker here in New Hampshire, And we've provided electricity services to schools and towns and businesses for 10 years. So we've done all of these energy things that other folks are planning to do. When it comes to community power, we answered an RFP initially with Keene and are their vendor. We help them design their plan. We help them put together their committee, because one of the requirements is that you have a committee from your community. We surveyed their community to look at what they want for a plan. And we've been through the city process of approval and now the PUC process of approval. In smaller towns, we've been approved by select boards, and the plan that we've put together with those committees has been approved at the select board level. And we've delivered savings to our customers here in New Hampshire for 10 years. And unfortunately now those savings will double or triple because of the crazy cost of the utility default service rate.
I think the short answer to the question, though, is the community needs to decide who they want to provide the service to them, and the community has options.
And I'll just note, though, so all members of the Community Power Coalition, they're not in any way obligated to take service from the coalition. The ones, the dozen or so that have developed plans and brought those to town meetings, those plans in no way commit them or obligate them to taking service with the coalition. That's a decision that they'll have to make after the fact. So participating with the coalition doesn't require
Question
taking
here.
service.
Sorry.
So, our town is sandwiched and we're serviced by Hampshire Electric Co-op, 87% of the town. My house is never serviced, unfortunately. But just explain what the relationship is. So we sign up for community power, we got all these poles and everything else coming in. What's the relationship with NHEC? Do they kind of get pushed aside? How does
Their role remains largely unchanged. They will still own the distribution grid, operate the distribution grid, deliver the power, send you the bill in the vast majority of cases, and be compensated for that service of operating the distribution grid. What changes is the source of your energy supply. You can now decide as a town in Sandwich what you want to prioritize in sourcing your energy supply, and that can be done with one of the service providers.
So how is that different from like, now I can purchase RECs?
The difference is you have greater buying power with your community, and if you're participating alongside other communities, those communities as well, and ability to have that economy of scale and have market power and perhaps choose more options than you could as an individual customer, whether that's building new renewables or some of the innovations that Josh was talking about in terms of creating cost savings out of more innovative technology and demand-side programs.
Saw a hand here.
Yeah, so this sounds exciting at the local level, and I see the strength of what I'm hearing today centered around local control, right? The U.S. government's not going to take care of us. ISO New England doesn't, isn't taking care of us. The states try, but it sounds like we're getting down to local control, and I get that. But then as you band more towns together, it's easier to hedge and create an efficient portfolio of PPAs and other assets, right? So now you're going to grow to the point where you've banded together so many small towns that how are you, like I love that example about biomass units about to go under. The town said, let's support it because there's so many jobs, but if you get towns on the east side, east coast of New Hampshire, up north, in the west, how do you do local when you're aggregating to get a better price?
It's a really good question, and it was very much considered and unpacked in the design of the Joint Powers Agreement and the coalition model. So the coalition is not one supply program that is uniform across every single member. Each member will have its own community power aggregation, and over time there will be the flexibility for those individual communities and their individual plans to be differentiated from one another. So if one member of the coalition wants to prioritize lowest costs, and the other one wants to prioritize contracting for a project for a new renewable energy system, it's not required that every member participate in that project. So it's a really good point you're making, though, Rick.
And I wonder actually if, Scott, this might be a good question for you. You might have struggled to hear the question, but there's 234 towns in the state of New Hampshire, I think is the number. If each of them has a different electric aggregation plan, how does that work from a portfolio management perspective?
So I think one of the things that you want to keep in mind in local community control and all those things are really important, and so is collaboration with your peers, and that's why an organization like CPCNH is formed, right? So you want to balance the elements of all the different communities with the idea that I have economies of scale as a buyer and a portfolio manager, and so there's some trade-offs there that happen along the way. But in a technical sense, we can both model the unique things about all of the communities in our models and provide projections and cost sharing things and the impact of local projects on the community specifically, while still having an aggregate and corporate overall perspective about how we might want to manage risk and all work together. So,
am I right in saying that what we're talking about is you could have individual PPAs in which the customer is an individual community, and that can be part of their portfolio, as opposed to, yeah.
And if I could, just to add to that, I think the other important thing to remember is, especially in the coalition model, you also have the power to establish the rate structures and tariffs. So, for example, there's communities that have established economic development tariffs to encourage new businesses to come in. They've established pricing models that specifically are targeted to support certain elements of their economy. And those are all unique functions that can be tailored to each community. Right, so you get these additional tools available to you to support what's going on and reflect specific to what's happening in your community.
In the back there.
For communities that have their own municipal utility, like for instance Wolfboro, how do they plug into the coalition?
The question is about municipal utilities.
My understanding is that they cannot participate. It's Clifton, yes? Okay.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? Because we're talking about public power, right? And the difference here is who owns the transmission and distribution lines. So if you already have a public utility, they own the pipes and wires, and they're also giving you the electron supply. But if it's a public agency, then you still have the same benefits, right? Structure-wise, it's going to look a little bit different, but in principle, we're still talking about public power.
Sir.
Ethan Golden. So my question is, Calpine, you talked about how the distributed resources of lots and lots of individual customers can provide some benefits back in this model. And then Bob, you're talking about how communities can make capital investments in new renewables. I'm curious what is being done to sort of put those two things together and make capital investments in distributed resources for lots of customers, because the upfront costs for heat pumps and weatherization and EVs and batteries and things like that are sometimes prohibitive. How do you put the chocolate in the game?
Yeah, so one member of the lots.
Yeah, I don't have a lot. I think that right now we only have so many tools in our legislative toolbox here in New Hampshire, and we're looking for a lot of the active dockets to be completed so that we have more tools and better answers to questions like that. But right now we're waiting on the storage docket. We're waiting on time of use. We're waiting on a variety of study groups that are providing us with more opportunities to do not only, a specific project, but to be able to add benefits through the usage or the demand response programs that are available or would be available in a more complex model that we probably will have in the next couple years.
So the power of having the community in control of both its supply, but also the revenues that are associated with that, is that your world is not predicated on the whims of the regulatory legislative process, right? So to answer your question, the world that we're currently operating in, already to a certain degree, we're contemplating what happens both on a traditional new steel in the ground or existing infrastructure generation, and what happens on the demand side. And it's just what's changing is now the demand side world is becoming a bigger player, and it will continue to become a bigger player. And the models around that, some of them are well established. There's new models that are coming forward that play into that talk, and this is a detailed conversation, but you can produce actuary hedges around how your supply side performs, and then the resources that you're able to call upon. But functionally, if I can send a signal and say, hey, tomorrow I've got X amount of energy exposed to real-time market prices, I'm going to send a signal to all the devices in my community, and this is how much I'm going to pay you to reduce energy energy and that cost is less than what I would otherwise have to pay in the market, I'm saving money by doing that. I'm now putting the money back in my community, right? And I'm also managing efficiently my portfolio. So that's my simple explanation to that. But I'll just add that there's so much more going on when you have a local pool of funds that can be reinvested to do weatherization, retrofits, solar programs, battery programs, distributed generation, EV electrification, building electrification. All that is at your fingertips, and your limitations are significantly less.
Just want to make sure. Okay, there.
This question is for Josh. I'm curious from the California perspective, where do you see the participation level in the CCAs going? You mentioned a third of California is currently on CCA, and you see that steadily increasing, eventually getting to 100%. Where do you see that kind of tailing off in so
So we continue to see communities joining community power. I'm sure the same is true across the United States. I'm sure for the good energy and similar providers. I think more and more communities are looking at what control means for them. But we do continue to see that. It's a political process. Everyone in this room knows, right? It is the community and their elected officials coming together and saying, this is something that's important to us, and so we're going to take that step. So there's a timeline associated with any political process, and so you have pretty good visibility, but ultimately, depending, that process can go one way or the other. But we still continue to expect that to grow, and current forecasts indicate that, by probably over the next 10 years in the California market, they expect somewhere between 50 to 70% of the market to be within the community power world. And I think the same is true for markets that are moving in community power models.
So folks, that's the time that we have today. I'm sorry that we had such a short Q&A period. Feel free to grab the speakers. And if anyone has questions for Scott, thank you for hanging out on the Zoom. We can direct you to him. So thank you so much to everybody who was here.